Growing up, it was just my mom, my two sisters, and me. Mom worked long hours as a nurse, doing her best to keep things together while raising 3 kids on her own. Vacations were rare, between the bills and her unpredictable schedule. We usually spent weekends at home or visiting relatives. One Thursday evening, my mom came home from work unusually upbeat. She explained that a coworker had offered her the use of a cabin for the weekend, a quiet place in the woods where we could unwind. It was an opportunity to get away, and she thought it would be good for all of us. She said we'd be leaving the next afternoon after school, so we needed to start packing. My youngest sister, Carol, was immediately excited, asking if Luna, our dog, could come along. My older sister, Cindy, looked less thrilled, but she didn't argue. The whole thing felt a little out of the blue, but none of us wanted to waste the chance for something different. That night, as Mom hurried to pack what we'd need, the 3 of us couldn't stop imagining what the cabin would be like. None of us had ever stayed anywhere so isolated before. It felt new and exciting. At least, it did then. After school the next day, we packed up the family car and headed to the mountains. It was a 3-hour drive, so it was late by the time we arrived. We unloaded the car and explored the cabin. We picked our rooms, or rather, our mom took the smaller room with a double bed for herself, while the 3 of us shared the larger room. Cindy got the double bed, and Carol and I took the bunk bed on the other side of the room. The bunk bed was next to a window that didn't have a curtain. The cabin was a ranch-style setup with a small loft you could climb up to. It was probably meant for storage, but we quickly claimed it as our space to hang out and play games. There were a few dozen board games up there, so we started playing immediately. We went to bed around 11. I must have fallen asleep immediately, because the next thing I knew, Carol was climbing down from the top bunk, gripping my arm, and trying to burrow into my side. She was squeaking something in fright, and I couldn't make out what she was saying. Cindy sat up in the double bed, groggily asking what was going on. I looked toward the window, and that's when I saw something pale and human-shaped moving away into the dark. My sleepy brain took a few moments to process what I was seeing before I shot out of bed, pulling Carol with me. Cindy quickly joined us, and we all ran out of the room together. As we ran toward Mom's room, Luna suddenly started growling from the living room. Carol froze in her tracks, but I kept pulling her along until we reached Mom's door. Luna followed us, her growling only stopping once we opened the door and she entered Mom's room with us. We told Mom what we had seen, but she brushed it off, saying we must have been imagining things. She added something about there being no such thing as a boogeyman, which didn't make us feel any better. Carol whispered under her breath that she wasn't so sure, and honestly, neither was I. She told us to go back to bed and let her know if we saw anything else. Begrudgingly, we went back to the room, but Carol refused to sleep. I stayed awake for a while to reassure her, and eventually fell asleep after she did. The next morning, everything felt normal again. Mom was in the kitchen making breakfast while Cindy helped her. Carol and I went outside to explore. The cabin was surrounded by trees that stretched in every direction. We spent an hour wandering around before heading back to eat. After breakfast, we drove into town, where Mom took us to several small shops and bought us lunch. We didn't return to the cabin until late in the afternoon. As we approached, Mom suddenly stopped in her tracks. She squinted at the cabin, her expression changing. She stepped forward cautiously and nudged the front door open with her hand. It wasn't latched. Mom motioned for Cindy to stay close to Carol and me and quietly went inside. She disappeared for a minute before calling us all in. Once we were inside, Mom locked the door and pulled Cindy aside. Carol and I stayed in the living room, unsure of what to do. After a few minutes, Cindy came back, her face hard to read. She suggested we play one of the board games from the loft to pass the time. We were halfway through a round when Mom returned and joined us, but her expression stayed tense. That night, we went to bed early. Cindy was upset about the early bedtime, but didn't argue too much. Luna slept in Mom's room that night. Carol and I climbed into our usual spots in the bunk bed, with me on the bottom and her on the top. We chatted for a while before falling asleep. I woke up later to Mom rushing into our room. She reached up to pull Carol out of the top bunk and grabbed my arm as I was climbing down from the bottom bunk. Cindy was already up, stepping out of the double bed. In the living room, Luna was growling again. Her fur bristled as she paced near the front door, which was slightly ajar. Without a word, Mom hurried us all out to the car. She went back to grab Luna, and we drove away from the cabin in silence. The drive home was tense, and none of us spoke. It took Luna nearly an hour to calm down. The next day, Cindy told me what had happened. Mom had woken up that night to faint noises outside her bedroom window, like someone pacing. When she got up to check, she found that the front door had been opened, and one of the kitchen chairs had been removed and placed beneath the outside of the bunk room window. The window was high off the ground, too high to reach without assistance. What truly made her stomach drop, though, was seeing that the window had been cracked open by an inch, even though none of us had touched it. Cindy also said that just before we left, while Mom was doing one last check around the cabin, her flashlight caught sight of a backpack discarded in the bushes near the bunk room window. She had unzipped it and found duct tape and rope inside. Cindy explained that this was what truly sealed Mom's decision to rush us out of there without a word. She didn't tell us then, but years later, she admitted she thought someone had been preparing to take one of us girls. We never went back to that cabin, or any cabin, for another family trip. In the fall of 2018, my girlfriend Vivian and our college friends Robert and Kathy decided to go on a weekend getaway. We found a cabin that was only accessible by crossing a lake, completely secluded, with the lake on one side and dense woods surrounding the rest. It seemed like the perfect base for a few days of exploring the woods and relaxing away from everything. It was cheap, clean, and far more isolated than we had anticipated. But we were excited to have a quiet place where we could be as obnoxious as we wanted. We booked it for a couple of nights. The cabin was roughly an hour from the nearest town, partly because the only way to reach it was by water. We picked up 2 rental canoes from a shop in town, strapped them to our car, and drove 20 minutes to the lake's public access point. From there, it would be another 30-minute paddle to reach the dock by the cabin. We loaded our supplies into the 2 rental canoes as the afternoon light started to fade. The rental shop owner seemed hesitant when we mentioned our destination. but simply warned us to be careful while out on the water. We paddled across the still lake. It was beautiful, but the isolation was eerie. Just trees surrounding the lake and cabin, stretching endlessly into the distance. We unloaded our gear at the small dock and settled into the cabin. The place was basic but clean: 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room with a fireplace. After getting everything inside, we started a fire in the outdoor pit. Once night fell, we left our coolers and fishing gear on the dock, planning to use them in the morning. Around 9 p.m., Vivian went to grab more drinks from the cooler. She came back inside fast, pointing at fresh footprints in the mud leading from the tree line to the cabin. We checked around but found no signs of anyone. The prints certainly weren't there when we arrived. Inside the cabin, our earlier excitement was gone. We ate some instant ramen in silence. The quiet inside the cabin was unsettling. Outside, we could hear twigs snapping and leaves rustling in the woods. The noises kept getting closer, moving around the cabin and dock area, stopping, then starting again from different spots. We tried telling ourselves it was just animals, but deep down, I don't think any of us believed it. I opened some wine coolers and got out a board game, trying to lighten the mood. For a while it worked. We were laughing and playing, pretending not to notice the sounds outside. Around midnight, we heard clear footsteps on the dock. Looking out with our flashlights, we saw no sign of anyone, just ripples in the water near the dock. Our fishing rods were gone, and the coolers had been moved. Robert and I went to check the dock. From the start of it, we could see our cooler had been dragged to the far end. As we got closer, we saw our tackle boxes had been dumped out all along the dock, gear scattered everywhere. We ran down to gather what we could save. Robert crashed hard, face first into the wooden planks. His foot had caught on a fishing line strung at ankle height. Blood ran from his nose as I helped him up. We found 3 more lines tied at different heights along the dock. Someone had set up these traps while we were inside. We grabbed what was left of our supplies and headed back to the cabin, Robert limping beside me. Vivian cleaned up Robert's bloody face in the bathroom. His hands were scraped raw from catching himself on the dock. At 2 a.m., we heard more footsteps on the dock. When we looked out, one of our canoes was untied and was drifting away from the dock. We all knew someone had to go after it. One canoe wouldn't get us all out of there. Robert suggested going alone, but I said that was too dangerous. Vivian pointed out they'd need 2 people, one to paddle out there, and another to get into the drifting canoe and paddle it back. The real question was, who would go, and who would stay behind at the dock? Robert wanted me to go with him, but Vivian and Kathy objected to us leaving the 2 women alone on the dock, with whoever was out there. After a quick back and forth, we agreed Robert and Kathy would take the canoe out, while Vivian and I kept watch from shore. When we got to the dock, we found that they had tried to untie the other canoe too. The ropes were partially undone, but it had obviously been tied more securely than the first one, and they were unable to untie it in a rush. The paddles were still in our canoe, thankfully, and with our flashlights, we could see them in the drifting one too. At least they hadn't thrown them in the lake. I quickly untied the canoe fully. and Robert and Kathy paddled out after the drifting canoe. Vivian and I waited on the dock, searching the tree line and water with our flashlights. We could hear movement in the woods around us. After about 10 minutes, they caught up to the drifting canoe almost halfway across the lake. We watched as Robert carefully moved from one canoe to the other to secure it. It took them another 15 minutes to get both canoes back. We loaded up quickly. Vivian and I took one canoe, Robert and Kathy the other. We paddled straight back to the public access point, got in our car, and drove home. We left most of our gear behind. We returned the canoes to the shop the next morning. I still think about that night sometimes. If they'd managed to untie both canoes, we would have been stranded out there with no way to call for help. There was no cell reception out by the cabin. None of us has dared venture into the woods again since. A few years ago now, my good friend Patricia invited me to a party at a cabin with her cousin Kathleen. Kathleen's parents, Patricia's uncle and aunt, had rented the cabin for her birthday, and they thought that it would be a quiet celebration, though Kathleen had other plans. She had thrown a party there the year prior, and it was a big hit, so she decided that she wanted to do it again. Patricia and I drove to the cabin together, and it was in a pretty isolated area. Aside from the woods behind it, there wasn't much around. We couldn't see any other cabins nearby, and being winter, we assumed they were probably empty anyway. It was pitch black when we arrived, and we had to use our phones to light the way to the cabin. At first, everything seemed to be going smoothly. Kathleen was enjoying herself, and the cabin was full of people. But Patricia and I couldn't help but notice a tension in the air, as if there was some sort of divide between the guests. It turned out that a group of uninvited people had crashed the party. They were helping themselves to the alcohol without contributing any of their own, which didn't sit well with the others. As the night went on, someone mentioned they had lost signal on their phone. Others checked their devices and realized the same thing. None of us had service anymore. A few people laughed it off, saying it was a good excuse to unplug. But it only made the cabin feel more isolated. To get rid of the uninvited group, someone mentioned hearing a truck approaching and claimed it was likely the cabin owner, rumored to have a reputation as an aggressive underworld type. Word quickly spread that one of the guys from the group had a bad history with the owner and didn't want any trouble, prompting them to leave. But just as things started to calm down, someone from the uninvited group outside began revving their car engine repeatedly, its headlights flashing through the windows. While everyone was distracted, we suddenly heard faint tapping on the walls of the cabin, followed by the sound of footsteps outside. At first, we thought it might be someone from the group playing a prank, but the noises moved, circling the cabin, stopping at one side and starting again on the other. Before we could process that, we heard the sound of a window being smashed in one of the back rooms. Chaos broke out as more windows were shattered, and people started shouting and screaming. Someone yelled that they had seen one of the uninvited guests outside, and another claimed they spotted something in the person's hand. It looked like a gun. That realization spread panic through the group. Patricia and I had been at the party for only an hour when everything went south. The majority of us stayed inside the cabin, but a few brave souls went outside to check if the group was still around. People began to leave in waves. worried that the uninvited group might still be out there waiting. At one point, 3 girls who had been planning to stay the night gathered their things and headed for the door. As soon as they stepped outside, we heard the sound of heavy footsteps and loud banging sounds. It turned out that one of the uninvited guests had fired a gun aimlessly into the night sky, right above the cabin. Terrified, the girls turned around and rushed back inside without a word, their faces pale. Patricia and I stayed for a couple more hours to make sure Kathleen wasn't left alone. While most people were leaving, I noticed something odd. On the window closest to the smashed one, someone had written a message on the window pane with their finger, using blood. The message read, "Last year's party was way better." I pointed it out to Patricia, and we both felt a chill. The thought that they might have also crashed Kathleen's party last year crossed our minds. But we didn't mention it to Kathleen to avoid scaring her any further. By the time we were getting ready to leave, only a handful of people remained. And thankfully, there were no further incidents. However, just as we were about to step outside, the power in the cabin went out, plunging everything into sudden darkness. People scrambled to turn on the flashlights on their phones, but the unease was palpable. Kathleen quickly locked the door behind us as we stepped out. When we got to Patricia's car, we saw it had been tampered with. The back tires were partly deflated, and something that looked and smelled like feces was smeared across the windshield. We had no idea if it was human or not, and we didn't want to find out. A deep scratch ran along the driver's side door, as if made deliberately with a sharp object. We decided to ride with another group back into town, leaving the car for daylight to avoid taking any chances. The next morning, Patricia and I returned with a few others to collect her car. In the daylight, the scene felt less tense, but unsettling signs remained. As we approached the car, we noticed someone had spray-painted crude words and a phallic symbol along the side of the cabin closest to where the car had been parked. The graffiti wasn't artistic or clever, just random scrawls clearly meant to intimidate or provoke. Around the car, we found discarded beer cans and an empty lighter fluid container. The windshield was still smeared, and whoever had deflated the tires had also shoved sticks and trash into the exhaust pipe. We got the car ready to drive, but the whole situation left us shaken, knowing how petty and calculated the whole thing had been. Kathleen initially planned to lie to her parents, claiming the broken windows were caused by a storm, but it didn't take long for them to discover the truth. The smashed windows and the crude graffiti scrawled across the cabin made it impossible to hide what had really happened. To this day, I still feel uneasy thinking about how dangerous the situation could have been. The damage wasn't just random vandalism. It felt personal, calculated, like whoever did it wanted to scare us. Knowing how isolated we were, with no quick way to get help, still gives me chills. It's terrifying to think how much worse things could have been if we hadn't left when we did.